Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had a Jackhammer Mutant quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. All men are not created equal. That was the harsh, undeniable truth of the world that Izuku Midoriya learned at the tender age of 4. It was a lesson most children learned when they saw someone faster, smarter, or stronger than them on the playground. For Izuku, the lesson was not one of inadequacy, but one of terrifying, crushing weight. It was a lesson burned into his mind, etched into his bones, and forged in cold, heavy steel. Before the world changed, before his own body betrayed his innocence, Izuku's world was wonderfully, blissfully simple. It was composed of bright primary colors, the brilliant smile of the number one hero, All Might, and the breathless anticipation of the future. He was 4 years old, the magical age when the impossible became reality. It was the age of quirks. Every day at preschool was a lottery of miracles. One Tuesday, little Tsubasa grew leathery, red wings from his shoulder blades. The week after, a girl named Miyuki sneezed and accidentally froze the classroom's goldfish bowl solid. But the most spectacular awakening belonged to his best friend, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku remembered that day with crystalline clarity. They had been sitting in the sandbox under the warm afternoon sun. Katsuki had been frustrated, balling his small fists, demanding that the damp sand clump together to form a towering castle. He squeezed his hands tightly, a scowl on his face, when suddenly, pop, pop, crackle, a smell like burnt sugar and ozone filled the air. Little flashes of orange light burst from Katsuki's palms, throwing sand in every direction. The other children had gasped, stepping back in fear. But Izuku had leaned forward, his large, emerald eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated awe. Kaken! Izuku had breathed, watching the smoke curl from his friend's hands. That's amazing! It's so flashy! You're going to be an amazing hero! Katsuki had puffed out his chest, a feral, triumphant grin spreading across his face. Of course I am! My quirk is the best in the whole world. I'm going to be number one. Just you watch. From that day on, Katsuki was the undeniable king of the playground. His explosion quirk was the gold standard, the perfect blend of power, flash, and utility. He was destined for greatness, and everyone knew it. Izuku, meanwhile, waited. He waited with a desperate, burning hope. He would stand in front of his bedroom mirror, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to breathe fire like his father, or reaching out his hand, trying to pull his all-might action figures toward him like his mother could with her minor telekinesis. Nothing happened. The weeks bled into months. 4.5 years old. 4 3/4. The anxiety began to mount. His mother Inko started looking at him with a soft, worried pity that made Izuku's stomach twist. He didn't want pity. He wanted power. He wanted to stand beside Kaken. He wanted to save people with a fearless smile. The awakening did not come with a flashy spark. It came with a fever that felt like the sun had been swallowed whole and was burning its way out of his chest. It started on a Tuesday night in late November. The air outside was crisp and biting, but inside his all-might-themed bedroom, Izuku was suffocating. He tossed and turned in his sheets, his skin slick with a cold, clammy sweat. His arms, from the elbows down, felt like they were trapped beneath the tires of a truck. A deep, agonizing throb pulsed in the marrow of his bones. Mommy! He whimpered, the sound barely escaping his dry, cracked lips. The pain intensified, shifting from a dull throb to a sharp, tearing sensation. It felt as though his flesh was being stretched, unmade, and remade all at once. His muscles spasmed violently. A strange, metallic humming sound filled his ears, vibrating so deeply it rattled his teeth. Mommy! He screamed, the terror finally breaking through his exhaustion. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. The door threw open, the hallway light casting a long shadow as Inko Midoriya rushed into the room, her hair in disarray. Izuku! Baby, what's wrong? She fell to her knees beside his bed, reaching out to press the back of her hand against his forehead. She gasped, pulling her hand back as if she had been burned. You're burning up. Oh my God, Izuku! My arms, Izuku sobbed, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. He tried to reach up to her, to wrap his arms around her neck and seek the comfort only a mother could provide. But he couldn't move them. He strained, his small biceps bulging with effort, but his forearms remained pinned to the mattress. They were unimaginably heavy. Panic seized him. He looked down through his tear-blurred vision and saw that the sleeves of his all-might pajamas had ripped open, the fabric strained to the point of tearing. Inko reached down to pull the blanket away, her breath catching in her throat as the soft light of the bedside lamp illuminated the bed. Izuku's arms were no longer the soft, fragile limbs of a 4-year-old boy. From the elbow down, his skin had lost its pale, peachy hue, replaced by a dark, dull gunmetal gray. The flesh had expanded, swelling into thick, cylindrical shapes that looked frighteningly mechanical. Dense, overlapping plates of organic metal formed the outer casing of his forearms. Where his delicate elbows used to be, there were now thick, ribbed vents that looked like the exhaust ports of an engine. His hands, once small and dexterous, had mutated completely. The fingers were thick, blocky, and heavily calloused, flattening out at the knuckles into broad, heavy impact pads. He didn't have hands anymore. He had the blunt ends of a demolition tool. Suddenly, a violent hiss erupted from his elbows. A burst of hot steam shot out from the vents, singeing the bedsheets. The metallic cylinders of his forearms suddenly shunted forward and snapped back with a deafening clack, violently shaking the entire bed. The sheer kinetic force of the involuntary movement sent a shockwave through the mattress, shattering the wooden slats beneath him. Izuku screamed again, not just from the pain, but from the terrifying realization that his body was no longer his own. "Izuku!" Inko shrieked, tears springing to her eyes. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms under his armpits, completely ignoring the blistering heat radiating from his mutated limbs, and heaved. She almost fell over from the sheer, unexpected weight of him. Her little boy, who had weighed barely 40 pounds yesterday, now felt like a lead statue. "Hold on, baby, hold on," she cried, struggling to carry him down the hallway to the car. "Mommy's got you. We're going to the hospital." The emergency room of the Muzudafu General Hospital was a sterile, blindingly white environment that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Izuku sat on the edge of the examination table, wearing a hospital gown that was entirely too big for him. His arms, his heavy, terrifying arms, hung limply at his sides, pulling his small shoulders downward. The hospital staff had to place a reinforced steel stool beneath his hands so the weight wouldn't dislocate his shoulder joints. Dr. Garaki, a bald man with bushy mustache and thick, round glasses, stood by the glowing light box, examining a series of X-rays with a clinical, detached fascination. Inko sat in a plastic chair in the corner, her face pale, her hands wringing a tissue into shreds. "Fascinating," Dr. Garaki murmured, tapping a pen against the X-ray film. "Truly, a textbook case of a sudden-onset mutant-type quirk, though the sheer density of the physiological changes is staggering." "What is happening to my baby?" Inko asked, her voice trembling. Will he go back to normal?" Dr. Garaki turned, adjusting his glasses. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Midoriya. Mutant-type quirks permanently alter the user's anatomy. What you see is not a temporary transformation or an emitter effect. His cellular structure from the humerus down has fundamentally rewritten itself." The doctor walked over to Izuku and gently tapped the boy's forearm with his pen. It made a sharp, resonant clink, like striking a cast-iron skillet. "Your son's forearms are now composed of a naturally occurring, biometallic alloy," the doctor explained, his tone entirely too casual for the nightmare Izuku was living. "His ulna and radius bones have fused and thickened, acting as the primary drive shafts for what appears to be a biological pneumatic system. The elbow joints have mutated into air intake and exhaust valves. Essentially, Mrs. Midoriya, your son's arms are living, breathing jackhammers." Izuku stared at his metallic hands. Jackhammers? The word felt ugly. It didn't sound like a hero's quirk. It sounded like a construction tool. It sounded loud, dirty, and destructive. The fever he experienced was his body's desperate attempt to burn the calories necessary to forge this metal within his own biology. Dr. Garaki continued, flipping through his notes. The pain was the restructuring of his nerves and ligaments to handle the sheer weight. And there is a lot of weight. Each of his arms currently weighs roughly 25 kilograms. Inko gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. 50 kilos? But he's only 4. How is he supposed to lift them? How is he supposed to walk? For now, he won't be able to without significant physical therapy, the doctor replied bluntly. His core, his spine, and his leg muscles will naturally adapt over time to support the extra mass. That is the nature of quirk adaptation. However, the doctor's expression finally softened into something resembling pity. He is going to face immense difficulties. Fine motor skills will be nearly impossible. Holding a pencil, tying his shoes, using chopsticks, these will be monumental challenges. His fingers lack the articulation of human joints. They are designed for impact, not dexterity. Izuku looked up, his green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Can I still be a hero? He asked, his voice small, desperate for a lifeline. Like All Might? Dr. Garaki sighed, a heavy, dismissive sound. All Might is a symbol of peace. He saves people with a smile and a gentle hand. Your hands, young man, are built to shatter concrete. You lack the finesse required for civilian rescue, and the recoil of your own power will likely cause you severe skeletal trauma if you attempt to fight. I suggest you look into a career in demolition, or perhaps heavy construction. It's a respectable living. The words hit Izuku harder than any physical blow could have. The doctor hadn't just diagnosed his quirk, he had diagnosed his future. He had looked at the metal grafted to Izuku's soul and declared him unfit for the light. The ride home was cloaked in a suffocating silence. The rain had begun to fall, smearing the neon lights of the city across the car window. Izuku sat in the back seat, staring at his reflection in the glass. He tried to wiggle his fingers. They moved, but clumsily, the thick metal joints groaning softly. He tried to lift his right arm. He strained, gritting his teeth, his shoulder muscles screaming in protest. He managed to lift his fist perhaps 2 inches off his lap before exhaustion forced him to drop it back down with a heavy, sickening thud. When they arrived back at the apartment, Inko had to help him out of the car. She carried him inside, struggling under his immense weight, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She set him down on the sofa in the living room and immediately went to the kitchen to make tea, needing a moment to hide her tears from her son. Izuku sat alone in the dim light of the living room. His arms rested heavily on his thighs. He felt utterly miserable. His body ached, his mind was spinning, and the doctor's words echoed relentlessly in his head. Built to shatter concrete. Demolition. Lack finesse. He needed comfort. He needed his idol. On the low coffee table in front of him rested his favorite possession in the world, a limited edition, Silver Age All Might action figure. It was beautifully detailed, painted in bright red, white, and blue, with All Might's signature confident grin molded perfectly into the plastic. Izuku had held that toy every night since he was 3. It was his talisman. Slowly, painfully, Izuku leaned forward. He engaged his shoulder, utilizing his back muscles to help drag his heavy right arm off his lap. He reached out toward the table. His metallic, blocky fingers hovered over the plastic figure. He just wanted to hold it. He just wanted to press it to his chest and pretend that everything was going to be okay. He lowered his hand and attempted to grasp the toy. He tried to be gentle. He commanded his brain to close his fingers softly. But his new biology did not understand soft. His neural pathways were now wired to a heavy-duty, industrial engine. As his thick metal fingers closed around the plastic torso, a misfire in his nervous system occurred. The engine in his forearm involuntarily primed. CHK hiss. A sudden, violent vibration shot down his arm. The pistons in his forearm fired for a fraction of a millisecond. Crack. Izuku froze. The humming in his arm died down. He slowly pulled his hand back, the sheer weight of his arm dragging across the wooden coffee table, leaving deep, splintered gouges in the polished surface. There, resting on the ruined wood, was All Might. The figure had been completely crushed. The plastic torso was flattened into a jagged, unrecognizable wafer of red and blue. The head had snapped off, rolling away to the edge of the table, that confident, fearless smile now looking up at the ceiling from a severed neck. Izuku stared at the broken pieces. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the patter of rain against the window. He had destroyed it. He had just tried to hold it, to love it, and he had destroyed it. A choked, ugly sob ripped its way out of his throat. He couldn't wipe his own tears away. If he tried to touch his face, he might shatter his own skull. He was trapped in a body made for ruin. Hearing his cry, Inko rushed in from the kitchen. She saw the gouged table. She saw the shattered pieces of the toy. And she saw her little boy, leaning over his heavy knees, crying with a despair that no 4-year-old should ever possess. Inko collapsed to her knees in front of him. She didn't care about the table. She didn't care about the toy. She threw her arms around his trembling shoulders, pulling him against her chest. "I'm sorry!" Izuku wailed, his voice cracking. "Mommy, I'm sorry! I didn't mean to. I just wanted to hold him." "I know, baby, I know," Inko wept, burying her face in his messy green curls. "It's okay. It's going to be okay. I'm a monster!" Izuku sobbed, the metallic vents on his elbows hissing a steady stream of hot steam in time with his distress. "I'm a villain! I break everything!" "No, Izuku, no," Inko cried, holding him tighter, defying the heat of his arms. "You're my good boy. You're my sweet, wonderful boy. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She apologized not for the toy, but because she knew, deep in her heart, that the world was going to be incredibly cruel to her gentle son. Returning to the playground was a nightmare. Izuku had been out of preschool for 2 weeks. During that time, he had undergone intense, excruciating physical therapy just to learn how to stand upright without toppling over from the forward weight of his arms. His mother had bought him specialized braces, thick canvas and Velcro straps, that wrapped around his shoulders and connected to loops on his upper biceps, helping to distribute the weight across his back. He walked with a heavy, lumbering gait, leaning slightly backward to maintain his center of gravity. His clothes were heavily modified. His long-sleeved shirts were cut off at the elbows, unable to fit over his bulky, metallic forearms. When he finally returned to the kindergarten playground, the reaction was immediate. The children stopped running. The games of tag ceased. Every eye turned to the boy with the gunmetal arms. They whispered behind their hands. Some pointed. A few of the smaller girls hid behind the playground equipment. Izuku kept his eyes on the dirt, feeling his cheeks burn with shame. He dragged his feet, the metal of his hands occasionally bumping against his thighs with a dull clank. "Hey! Deku!" The voice was loud, brash, and dripping with authority. Izuku stopped. He looked up slowly. Standing at the top of the plastic slide, arms crossed over his chest like a reigning monarch, was Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki slid down, landing lightly on his feet in the sandbox. He marched over to Izuku, a trio of his usual lackeys following closely behind. Katsuki stopped a few feet away, his crimson eyes narrowed, scanning Izuku's new arms with intense scrutiny. For a moment, Katsuki felt a strange prickle of unease. He had always been the strongest. His explosions were the coolest. But looking at the sheer, dense mass of Izuku's new limbs, Katsuki felt a biological threat. Those arms looked like they belonged on a pro hero, or a tank. They didn't belong on weak, crying little Izuku. Katsuki scoffed, masking his brief insecurity with aggressive arrogance. "So, you finally got a quirk, huh? What took you so long? And what's with the ugly metal?" It's a mutant type, Kaken," Izuku stuttered, looking down at his blocky fingers. "The doctor called it Jackhammer." "Jackhammer?" One of Katsuki's lackeys, a boy with elongating fingers, laughed. "What kind of hero quirk is that? Sounds like you belong on a construction site." "Shut up," Katsuki snapped at his lackey, never taking his eyes off Izuku. He took a step closer, puffing out his chest. "Show me what it does. Prove it's not just for show." Izuku took a step back, his heavy boots scuffing the dirt. "And no, Kaken. I can't. The doctor said I shouldn't use it. It's dangerous. I don't have good control." "Are you saying your quirk is too dangerous for me?" Katsuki yelled, tiny sparks popping in his palms. The scent of caramel and ozone filled the air. "Don't look down on me, Deku! I said show me. I don't want to hurt anyone." Izuku pleaded. "You couldn't hurt me if you tried. Do it, or I'll blast those ugly metal pipes right off your arms." Katsuki raised a hand, a warning explosion popping loudly in the quiet playground. The other children gasped. Izuku panicked. He knew Kaken wouldn't back down. He knew that if he didn't do something, Kaken would attack him, and in defending himself, Izuku might accidentally hit him. He had to show him, but he had to aim at something safe. Izuku turned toward a large, decorative boulder sitting near the edge of the sandbox. It was a solid piece of granite, placed there by the landscapers to keep the sand contained. "Oh, okay," Izuku breathed. He waddled over to the boulder, planting his feet wide, just like his physical therapist had taught him to maintain his balance. He drew his right arm back. The sheer effort of lifting the 25-kilogram limb to shoulder height made his teeth grind together. He focused his mind. He didn't know exactly how to activate the quirk on command. It had only ever happened by accident when he was stressed or scared. Just punch, he told himself. Just push it forward. Izuku thrust his arm forward, striking the boulder with his flattened, metallic knuckles. The moment his metal flesh made contact with the stone, his biology took over. The vents on his elbows flared open. A deafening hiss of steam erupted, scalding the air behind him. The internal pneumatic valves engaged. CHK. It didn't happen in a single, clean strike. It was a relentless, high-frequency staccato of hyperkinetic impacts. In the span of a single second, Izuku's fist struck the boulder over 100 times, the metal pistons in his forearms pumping back and forth with terrifying, blurring speed. The granite didn't just break, it completely failed on a molecular level. With a thunderous crack that echoed across the entire schoolyard, the boulder exploded into a cloud of fine, gray dust and jagged shrapnel. But it didn't end there. The kinetic force had to go somewhere. The sheer recoil of the vibration traveled violently back up Izuku's arm. He felt a sickening pop in his shoulder, as his joint was partially subluxated. The shockwave of the impact rippled outward through the ground. The sandbox shuddered. Katsuki and his lackeys were thrown off their feet, tumbling into the sand as a localized tremor shook the playground. The playground equipment rattled violently. The cloud of dust washed over them, coating everyone in a thick layer of grit. Izuku fell backward, landing hard on his rear, clutching his right shoulder with his heavy left hand. Tears of pain sprang to his eyes, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. He looked at the spot where the boulder had been. There was nothing left but a crater in the dirt and a pile of gravel. Silence descended on the playground, heavier than the dust in the air. Katsuki pushed himself up from the sand, coughing. His eyes were wide, staring at the crater. He looked at his own hands, which suddenly felt very, very small. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. If Izuku had hit him with that, he would be dead. There would be nothing left of him. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Katsuki's heart. But Katsuki Bakudo did not know how to process fear. His brain immediately transmuted it into burning, furious anger. He scrambled to his feet, marching over to where Izuku was sitting in the dirt. Katsuki pointed a trembling, angry finger at the green-haired boy. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Katsuki screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "You could have killed someone. I told you I couldn't control it." Izuku cried, nursing his throbbing shoulder. "That's not a hero's quirk." Katsuki yelled, desperate to reclaim his superiority, to rationalize the terrifying display of power he had just witnessed. "Heroes save people. Heroes are flashy and cool and they protect the city. You just blew up a rock and caused an earthquake. You're just a monster." Izuku flinched as if he had been slapped. A monster. The same word he had used on himself. "You're not a hero," Katsuki sneered, stepping closer, his red eyes blazing with a mix of terror and disgust. "You have no finesse. You're just a clumsy brute. A walking demolition crew. You're basically a villain waiting to happen. You're just a heavy, useless block of metal. You're a Deku. That's what you are. A wooden doll, a blockhead, a completely useless Deku." The other children, emboldened by Katsuki's stance, began to murmur in agreement. "Yeah, that was scary. He broke the rock into dust. My mom says quirks that destroy things belong to bad guys." Izuku sat in the dirt, the dust settling in his wild green hair. He looked at his heavy, metallic hands. They were scratched and scuffed from the impact, but completely undamaged. They were indestructible, and they were terrifying. Katsuki turned his back on him, storming away, his lackeys scrambling to follow. "Stay away from me, demolition boy. You're too dangerous." Izuku was left alone in the dirt. He didn't cry. He was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by the pain in his shoulder and the crushing weight of Katsuki's words. A clumsy brute. A walking demolition crew. A villain waiting to happen. Was Kaken right? Was he destined to just break things? The next 10 years of Izuku Midoriya's life were a masterclass in endurance, frustration, and isolation. Growing up with a severe mutant-type quirk in a society that increasingly favored flashy, clean emitter quirks was a constant, uphill battle. Every aspect of his daily life was a struggle, a reminder that his body was fundamentally incompatible with a normal existence. There was the physical toll. Because his arms weighed so much, his body had to compensate. By the time he was 8 years old, he had the coarse strength of an Olympic weightlifter just to keep his spine aligned. He was stocky, dense, and heavily muscled in his chest, back, and legs. He was noticeably shorter than his peers, his growth stunted slightly by the sheer gravitational burden he carried every waking moment of his life. Running was a massive chore. His heavy arms threw off his momentum, making him a slow, lumbering runner. Swimming was entirely out of the question. The moment he stepped into a pool, he sank straight to the bottom like an anchor. Then there were the mundane struggles, the daily indignities that wore down his spirit. Eating with chopsticks was a comedy of errors. He either snapped the bamboo sticks or crushed the food into paste. His mother eventually bought him custom-made, titanium-reinforced utensils with thick, rubberized handles that he could clumsily grip. Writing was the worst of all. Izuku loved taking notes. He loved analyzing heroes. But standard pencils snapped like dry twigs between his flat, unyielding fingers. Pens shattered, leaking ink all over his hands. He had to resort to using thick, industrial-sized permanent markers, clutching them in his fist like a toddler holding a crayon. His handwriting, as a result, was atrocious, large, jagged, and messy, taking up half a page for a single sentence. And then there was the social isolation. Katsuki's decree from kindergarten had stuck. Izuku was Deku, the clumsy brute, the demolition boy. Children were naturally afraid of him. They didn't want to play tag with the boy whose accidental bump could crack their ribs. They didn't want to pass a ball to the boy who would accidentally pop it. Katsuki's bullying evolved over the years. It was no longer the cruel mockery of a quirkless child, as it might have been in another life. Instead, it was an ideological war. Katsuki viewed Izuku as a rival of raw power, but a rival entirely lacking in skill, control, or heroic aesthetic. A real hero controls his power, Katsuki would sneer in the middle school hallways, purposefully bumping his shoulder into Izuku's solid, metallic arm and acting as though he hadn't felt the jarring impact. You just wreck everything you touch. You're a liability, Deku. The moment you step on a battlefield, you'll cause more collateral damage than the villain. You're unsuited for hero work. Izuku never fought back. He couldn't. He knew that if he ever raised a hand in anger, if he ever let his internal engine prime and fire against a human being, he would kill them. He lived in constant fear of his own strength. He kept his head down, his arms securely strapped into the heavy-duty shock-absorbing braces his mother constantly bought for him, and he endured. But despite the pain, despite the isolation, and despite Katsuki's cruel words, the flame of heroism never died in Izuku's chest. It merely changed its fuel. The turning point, the moment that solidified Izuku's resolve and gave him a path forward, happened on a rainy evening when he was 10 years old. He was sitting alone in the living room, a thick notebook awkwardly pinned beneath his heavy left arm to keep it from sliding, while his right fist tightly gripped a massive, black marker. He was struggling to write down the details of a fight he had witnessed earlier that day between the hero Kamui Woods and a giant villain. The television was playing in the background, tuned to the evening news. The anchor's voice was tense, reporting on a massive, ongoing disaster in the next prefecture. We are coming to you live from Hosa City, where a villain with an earthquake-generating quirk has caused the collapse of a major highway overpass. Dozens of civilians are trapped beneath the rubble. Izuku stopped writing. He dropped his marker and looked up at the screen. The helicopter footage was terrifying. A massive section of concrete highway had collapsed, crushing several cars beneath tons of reinforced steel and asphalt. Smoke and dust filled the air. Several pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were struggling. Izuku recognized them. There was backdraft, pouring water over the burning vehicles, but he couldn't move the concrete. There was Kamui Woods, trying to wrap his wooden branches around a massive slab of asphalt, but the wood was groaning, splintering under the immense weight. The situation is dire, the reporter continued. The rubble is too heavy for the heroes on the scene to lift, and the structural integrity is too compromised to bring in heavy machinery without risking a secondary collapse and crushing the survivors. They need a rescue specialist with extreme physical strength, but none are close enough to respond in time. Izuku watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw a civilian, a woman covered in blood and dust, reaching her hand out from a narrow gap in the rubble, crying for help. The heroes couldn't reach her. The concrete was too thick. They needed finesse, sure, to get her out safely, but first they needed to remove the obstacle. They needed to destroy the barrier. As Izuku watched the screen, Katsuki's words echoed in his mind. You're a clumsy brute. A demolition crew. You just wreck everything you touch. Dr. Garaki's words followed. Built to shatter concrete. Demolition. Izuku looked down at his arms. They rested heavily on his lap, the gunmetal plating dull and scratched, the vents on his elbows dark and quiet. He hated these arms. He hated the weight of them. He hated that they couldn't hold a fragile toy without breaking it. But as he looked at the television screen, at the massive slab of concrete trapping that terrified woman, a profound realization washed over him. Finesse was important. Gently carrying a victim away was the job of a hero. But what good was a gentle hand if it couldn't reach the victim in the first place? What good was speed and flash if the path was blocked by a movable stone? He didn't need to be the hero who gently cradled people with a soft touch. He couldn't be. His body wasn't built for it. He was built to destroy. He was built to shatter, to pulverize, to tear down walls. I can break the things that trap people, Izuku thought, his breath catching in his throat. If a villain traps someone behind a wall of steel, I can tear it down. If a building falls on someone, I can turn the rubble to dust. I don't have to be the hero who holds them gently. I can be the hero who clears the path. Slowly, Izuku reached down and picked up his thick, black marker. He opened his notebook to a fresh, blank page. His movements were clumsy. The metal of his fingers clanked against the desk. He gripped the marker tightly, his knuckles locking into place. He began to write. The letters were huge, jagged, and ugly. They lacked all grace and elegance. But they were carved into the paper with undeniable, unstoppable force. At the top of the page, he didn't write All Might. He wrote, Hero analysis for my future, rescue through demolition. Izuku stared at the words. A small, fierce smile broke across his face, the first genuine smile he had worn in a long time. He knew the road ahead would be agonizing. He knew his body would fight him every step of the way. He knew the recall of his own power would tear his muscles and fracture his joints if he wasn't careful. He knew he would have to train 10 times harder than anyone else just to manage the weight of his own existence. Kaken was right. He was a Deku. He was a clumsy, heavy block of metal, but Izuku would take that name. He would take that block of metal and he would forge it into a shield. He would forge it into a hammer that would shatter every obstacle, every piece of rubble, every villain that stood between an innocent person and the light of day. He didn't have a flashy quirk. He didn't have one for all, or the favor of the heavens. All he had was the crushing weight of his own body, and the unbreakable will to use it. Izuku Midoriya flexed his metal hands. Deep within his forearms, the metallic engines gave a low, soft hum, like a beast waking from a long slumber. He was going to UA High School. He was going to become a hero. And he was going to break anyone who told him otherwise. The final bell of the day at Aldera Junior High did not ring so much as it buzzed, a harsh, grating sound that signaled temporary liberation for the student body. For Izuku Midoriya, it was simply the starting gun for another afternoon of meticulous, exhausting physical management. At 14 years old, Izuku looked less like a middle school student and more like a teenage powerlifter who had been grafted onto a construction vehicle. The last 10 years had forced his biology into a state of hyperadaptation. To support the 50 combined kilograms of his permanent, gunmetal gray forearms, his torso had thickened considerably. His core was a slab of dense muscle, his neck was thick, and his legs, specifically his thighs and calves, were built like the trunks of ancient oak trees. He stood at an average height, but his sheer width and low center of gravity made him an immovable object in the school hallways. He sat at a custom-reinforced steel desk at the back of the classroom. The school hadn't provided it out of the goodness of their hearts. They provided it because Izuku had accidentally splintered 3 standard wooden desks just by resting his arms on them during his first week. "All right, settle down," their homeroom teacher sighed, slapping a stack of papers against his podium. "You're all third years now. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'm passing out printouts for your career aptitude tests, but why bother? I know you all want to go to the hero track." The classroom erupted. Teenagers cheered, showing off minor levitation quirks, stretching their necks, or producing small bursts of water from their fingertips. Izuku didn't cheer. He simply exhaled, a soft hiss of steam escaping from the heavily grated exhaust vents built into his mutated elbows. He reached into his oversized backpack with agonizing care, his blocky, calloused metal fingers gripping a massive, thick-barreled permanent marker. He uncapped it with his teeth, clamped the marker in his fist, and clumsily dragged it across his notebook to finish a thought on the pro-hero, empty lady. Mass expansion implies extreme bone density scaling. Vulnerable to joint manipulation if toppled. His handwriting was large, jagged, and entirely capitalized, a necessity of his lack of fine motor control. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks," the teacher said, waving them down. "But remember the rules. No quirk usage in school. Now let's see. Bakugo, you're aiming for UA high, aren't you?" The room fell silent, the collective attention pivoting to the boy slouched in his chair near the window. Katsuki Bakugo kicked his feet up onto his desk, a cocky, feral grin spreading across his face. "Don't lump me in with these background characters, teach. I'm not just aiming for UA. I'm going to ace the exam, crush the records, and surpass All Might himself. I'm the only one here with the raw power and the finesse to make it to the top." Izuku kept his eyes glued to his notebook. He knew what was coming. "Oh, right," the teacher added, looking down at his clipboard. "Midoriya, you're also applying to UA, aren't you?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, laughter erupted. It wasn't the mocking, dismissive laughter of people who thought he was weak. It was the nervous, mocking laughter of people who thought he was insane. "Midoriya? Seriously? I mean, the guy is built like a tank, but come on, what's he going to do in the rescue exam? Accidentally collapse the building on the hostages?" Smash! Katsuki's palms slammed onto his desk, a localized explosion turning the wood to charcoal. The laughter died instantly. Katsuki stood up, turning his predatory red eyes toward the back of the room. He didn't look at Izuku with the contempt reserved for the weak. He looked at him with the fierce, unyielding disgust reserved for an aesthetic offense. "Listen here, demolition boy," Katsuki snarled, stalking down the aisle. He stopped right in front of Izuku's steel desk, looming over him. "UA isn't looking for a walking wrecking ball. The heroes there have class. They have control. You don't have an ounce of finesse in your entire, heavy-ass body. You're a liability. You'll fail the practical the second they ask you to do something other than break things." Izuku looked up. His green eyes were calm, though his jaw was clenched tight. He didn't shrink back. He couldn't, even if he wanted to. His sheer mass made cowering difficult. "The entrance exam is based on points, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady, a deep baritone that had settled in early due to his chest capacity. "It usually involves simulated urban combat against robotics. If I destroy the targets, I get points. I don't need finesse to fight a robot." Katsuki's eye twitched. Sparks popped from his knuckles. "You think you can compete with me just because you hit hard? I'll run circles around your slow, clunky ass. Keep your head down, Deku. The hero world doesn't need a brute who shatters every street he walks on." Katsuki turned and marched out of the classroom as the final bell finally rang true. Izuku watched him go, feeling the familiar, heavy ache in his chest. It was a different kind of bullying than he read about in comic books. Katsuki didn't beat him up, partly because punching Izuku was like punching a cast-iron radiator, and partly because Katsuki genuinely believed Izuku was a tragedy of biology, a villainous mutation masquerading as a hero candidate. Izuku slowly packed his bag. He strapped on his thick canvas shoulder braces, securing the heavy-duty buckles across his chest to help distribute the agonizing weight of his arms. He stood up, his boots hitting the floor with a heavy thud, and began the long walk home. The route home took him under a long, shadowed overpass. Izuku preferred this way. It was quiet, away from the bustling crowds of the market district where he constantly had to dodge pedestrians out of fear of accidentally breaking their toes with a stray step. He was muttering to himself, reviewing his notes on Empty Lady's center of gravity, when he heard it. It was a wet, squelching sound, like a massive plunger being pulled from deep mud. It echoed off the curved concrete walls of the tunnel, accompanied by a foul stench of raw sewage and stagnant water. Izuku stopped. He turned around, his heavy arms swinging slightly with his momentum. Rising from a manhole cover a few yards away was a nightmare of fluid dynamics. It was a massive, shifting mountain of dark green sludge. Two bulging, manic eyes floated in the viscous liquid, accompanied by a jagged maw of rotting teeth. A medium-sized meat shield, the sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and bubbling. A bit wide, but you'll do nicely to hide me from him. Izuku's analytical mind immediately kicked into overdrive. Fluid body. Viscosity seems high. No solid core visible. Conventional blunt force will be completely absorbed or dispersed. Normally, a teenager would run. Izuku tried. He pivoted on his heavy boots, his massive thigh muscles contracting, but his top running speed was pitiful compared to a normal boy his age. The weight of his arms pulled him forward, forcing him to take shorter, heavier strides to maintain his balance. He didn't make it 5 steps before a thick tendril of sludge whipped forward, wrapping tightly around his thick calves. With a wet schluck, Izuku was yanked backward. He hit the concrete floor hard, the metal of his left arm scraping against the ground and sending a shower of orange sparks into the dim tunnel. "Don't struggle, kid!" The villain laughed, surging forward and enveloping Izuku's lower half. The sludge crept up his torso, freezing cold and suffocating. "It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then I get a new ride." The slime rushed up, covering Izuku's mouth and nose. He clamped his jaws shut, holding his breath, his eyes wide with panic. The sludge was forcing its way up his nostrils, down his throat. He was drowning on dry land. "Fight back!" His mind screamed. Izuku engaged his core. He managed to rip his right arm free from the sludge's grip. He drew his massive, gunmetal fist back. He aimed directly for the creature's floating eye. He engaged his quirk. CHK hiss. The internal pneumatics fired. His fist shot forward like a cannonball, but as his knuckles struck the sludge, nothing happened. The villain's body merely rippled. The liquid dispersed the kinetic energy perfectly, parting around Izuku's metal arm like water around a stone, before snapping back together and enveloping his elbow. "Nice try, heavy metal," the villain taunted. "But you can't crush liquid." Izuku's vision began to spot with black. His lungs burned. The villain was right. He couldn't punch water. He couldn't activate his jackhammer frequency here. If he miscalculated the recoil against the concrete floor, he could bring the entire tunnel down on both of them. He was trapped by his own limitations. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Is this it? Is Kaken right? Am I just useless?" Suddenly, the manhole cover burst open completely, flying into the air with a metallic clang. "Fear not, young man!" The voice boomed through the tunnel, shaking the very air. It was a voice Izuku had listened to on endless YouTube replays since he was a toddler. Through the blurred, tear-filled vision of his one uncovered eye, Izuku saw him. A colossus of muscle, wearing a white t-shirt and cargo pants, his blonde hair standing in 2 distinct V-shaped bangs. All Might, Texas. Smash! The number 1 hero didn't even make contact. He simply drew back his fist and punched the air. The sheer, concentrated wind pressure created a localized hurricane within the tunnel. The shockwave hit the sludge villain like a freight train. The fluid body couldn't disperse wind pressure of that magnitude. The villain screamed as the sludge was violently blown apart, splattering against the walls and ceiling. Izuku was freed. He collapsed onto the pavement, hacking and coughing violently, thick globs of foul-tasting slime expelling from his lungs. He took deep, shuddering breaths of the cool tunnel air. Thought I lost you for a moment there. All Might bellowed, standing over Izuku with his trademark, blinding smile. Apologies for getting you caught up in my villain hunt. Are you all right, young man? Izuku stared, utterly paralyzed by shock. It was him. It was really him. He scrambled to sit up, his heavy arms clanking awkwardly against the pavement. He reached into his bag with trembling, blocky fingers, pulling out his notebook and his thick marker. "PP please. An autograph." Izuku stammered, holding the book out like an offering to a god. All Might laughed heartily. "Of course." He took the book. He noticed the thick marker in Izuku's unusual metal hands, pausing for a fraction of a second, but his smile never wavered. He signed a massive, sweeping signature across a 2-page spread. Izuku clutched the book to his chest, ignoring the fact that the sharp corners were scratching against his metal forearms. "Thank you? I'll treasure it forever. It'll be a family heirloom. Now, I must be off," All Might declared, patting his cargo pants where 2 large, plastic soda bottles were securely strapped. Inside the bottles, the sludge villain was swirling angrily. "I must deliver this scoundrel to the police." All Might crouched, preparing to leap. In canon, this was the moment Izuku grabbed All Might's leg. But Izuku knew his own body. He weighed over 200 pounds, mostly localized in his arms. His flat, metal fingers lacked the grip strength to hold onto fabric at terminal velocity. If he tried to grab All Might, he would either rip the hero's pants right off, or his heavy metal fingers would accidentally crush the man's calf muscles under the G-force of the jump. Instead, Izuku stayed planted on the ground. He had a question. A question that had haunted him for 10 years. He had to ask it now, before the hero disappeared forever. "All Might, wait!" Izuku yelled, his deep voice echoing in the tunnel. All Might paused his crouch, looking over his shoulder. "Yes? Make it quick, young man. A hero's work is never done." Izuku swallowed hard. He looked down at his gunmetal arms, at the brutal, unheroic machinery grafted to his skeleton. "Can someone?" Izuku started, his voice trembling slightly. "Can someone with a body built for destruction, a body that only knows how to break things, can someone like that be a hero who saves people?" All Might stopped. The wind in the tunnel seemed to die down. The number 1 hero turned around fully, looking at the stocky, heavily muscled teenager. He looked closely at Izuku's arms, recognizing the deep, mechanical venting and the blunt, heavy impact pads of his fingers. He recognized the severe, aggressive mutant-type quirk. For a moment, the ever-present smile on All Might's face softened into an expression of profound, tired understanding. "A mutant quirk of extreme density," All Might noted quietly. "I can see the weight you carry, young man. You ask if you can save people when your body is built for ruin." Izuku nodded, his eyes wide, holding his breath. "Pro-heroes regularly risk their lives," All Might said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the booming theatricality. "And some quirks are inherently lethal. If you cannot control your destructive output, you risk becoming a greater threat to the civilians than the villains themselves." Izuku felt his heart sink. It was the doctor's prognosis all over again. However, All Might continued, raising a massive finger. "Destruction and rescue are 2 sides of the same coin. Sometimes, to save a life, a wall must be broken. A car must be torn open. A meteor must be shattered. It is not the shape of your hands that determines your ability to be a hero. It is the discipline of your mind and the compassion in your heart." Tears, hot and fast, spilled over Izuku's freckled cheeks. He couldn't wipe them away, so he let them fall. He didn't say no. All Might didn't say no. "If you can master that terrible power," All Might said, his smile returning, softer this time, "then yes. You can be a hero." Izuku bowed, a stiff, heavy motion from his waist. "Thank you? Thank you so much. Now I really must. All Might suddenly stopped. A violently painful cough racked his massive frame. He slapped a hand over his mouth, and Izuku saw a thin spray of blood hit the concrete. All Might flinched. His time was up. He had pushed it too far. Desperate to get away before his true form was revealed, All Might instinctively surged upward, kicking off the ground with immense force. But the sudden, painful spasm of his cough had thrown off his coordination. As he launched into the sky, the violent jolt dislodged one of the plastic bottles from his cargo pocket. Izuku, still looking up, saw it happen in slow motion. The bottle, containing the dark green swirling mass of the sludge villain, slipped from the hero's pants and fell. It tumbled through the air, completely unnoticed by the rapidly ascending All Might. The bottle hit the edge of the overpass above and shattered, the plastic casing bursting open. Izuku gasped. The sludge immediately began to pour over the side of the bridge, pooling into the alleyway out of sight. All Might was already a speck in the sky, completely unaware he had dropped his cargo. Panic seized Izuku. The villain is loose. And it's my fault for distracting him. He didn't think. He just moved. His heavy boots pounded against the pavement as he broke into a lumbering, aggressive sprint, following the trajectory of the falling sludge. By the time Izuku reached the shopping district, the air was already thick with black smoke. A massive crowd had gathered at the entrance of a wide alleyway. Sirens wailed as police cars formed a blockade. Izuku pushed his way through the crowd. "Excuse me. Let me through. Heavy arms, watch out," he grunted, using his bulk to gently part the sea of onlookers. When he reached the front, his breath hitched. The alleyway was a war zone. The sludge villain had reformed, and this time, it was twice as large, having absorbed the water from a nearby broken fire hydrant to expand its mass. Fires raged in the surrounding buildings, the intense heat warping the air. Several pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were in complete disarray. Death Arms, a hero with immense physical strength, was clutching his own forearms, panting heavily. "It's no use. My punches just slide right through him. I can't grab hold of the hostage." Empty Lady was stuck at the entrance of the alley. "I can't go giant in here. I need a 2-lane street minimum, or I'll crush the buildings." Kamui Woods was swinging from a lamppost, but the roaring fires kept him back. "The flames are too intense. My wood will ignite if I get any closer." Izuku stared at the chaos. His analytical mind began tearing the situation apart. The heroes are completely mismatched. Blunt force is useless against a liquid body. Expansion quirks lack the spatial clearance. Wood is countered by fire. The villain has a tactical advantage. Then, he saw the hostage. Trapped deep within the swirling mass of green sludge was a boy in a middle school uniform. The boy was thrashing violently, his muffled screams barely audible over the roar of the flames. Every time the boy moved, furious, crackling explosions erupted from his palms, detonating within the sludge and setting more of the surrounding alley on fire. Izuku's blood ran cold, spiky ash-blonde hair, furious red eyes. Katsuki was suffocating. His explosions were useless. They were just blowing chunks of sludge away, only for the liquid to immediately reform around him. The villain was using Katsuki's quirk to keep the heroes at bay. "Damn it, where is a hero with a suitable quirk?" Death Arms yelled in frustration. "We just have to wait for someone who can blow this guy away." "Wait," Izuku thought, his eyes locked on Katsuki's face. Katsuki's eyes were rolling back into his head. He was losing consciousness. If they wait, Kaken will die. Izuku didn't make a conscious decision to move. His body, dense and heavy, simply acted on its own. He stepped past the police barricade. "Hey! Kid, get back here! It's dangerous!" A police officer yelled, reaching out to grab Izuku's shoulder. Izuku didn't even break his stride. The officer's hands slipped off Izuku's thick, muscular back as the boy broke into a heavy, ground-shaking sprint. Thud. 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 His boots cracked the pavement. The sheer momentum of his dense body carried him forward like a runaway boulder. The intense heat of the alleyway washed over him, but the biometallic alloy of his arms, used to the extreme temperatures of his internal engine, easily absorbed the heat. "What is that kid doing?" Kamui shouted. Stop him! The sludge villain turned its massive, fluid head. Its eyes widened in recognition. You! The heavy metal brat! Coming back for round 2, Katsuki, barely conscious, cracked an eye open. Through the dark green film of the sludge, he saw a blurry, stocky figure charging through the flames. He recognized that lumbering, heavy run. He recognized those ugly, gunmetal arms. Deku. Katsuki thought, his mind sluggish from lack of oxygen. What the hell are you doing? Izuku didn't say a word. He didn't have a witty catchphrase. He didn't have a battle cry. He only had a hyper-analytical mind and a pair of industrial jackhammers. Analysis. Izuku thought rapidly, his green eyes locked onto the villain's center of mass. Villain is entirely fluid. Blunt force is ineffective because the kinetic energy is dispersed. Explosions are ineffective because they merely displace the liquid temporarily. Izuku closed the distance, the fire reflecting off his metallic skin. Hypothesis. Izuku continued, anchoring his massive feet into the concrete as he came to a sliding halt right in front of the towering villain. Liquid maintains cohesion through surface tension. If subjected to hyperkinetic, localized, sustained vibrations, the liquid will lose molecular cohesion. It will experience cavitation. It will boil without heat. It will vaporize. Die, brat! The villain roared, swinging a massive tendril of sludge like a whip, aiming to decapitate Izuku. Izuku didn't dodge. He couldn't. Instead, he raised his heavy left arm, taking the blow directly on his forearm. The sludge slammed into the metal with the force of a car crash. Izuku's boots dug trenches into the asphalt as he was pushed back, but he didn't fall. The dense metal absorbed the blow entirely. With the villain distracted by the strike, Izuku drew his right arm back. He didn't form a fist. He flattened his blocky, calloused fingers, turning his hand into a solid, wedge-shaped spear of metal. He thrust his right arm forward, burying his hand and forearm deep into the thickest part of the villain's sludge body, right next to where Katsuki was trapped. Ha! Missed my eye. The villain mocked. You just stuck your arm in my belly. Now I'll rip it clean off. Izuku looked up at the villain. His expression was utterly terrifying in its calm, calculated focus. I didn't miss, Izuku said softly. He activated his quirk. Not for a split second like he did on the playground. Not an accidental misfire. He opened the valves completely. He flooded the internal combustion chambers of his arms with every ounce of physical energy his body possessed. CHHHHHHKKKKKKKKK. The sound was not a rapid heartbeat. It was the deafening, continuous scream of heavy machinery pushed past its red line. Izuku didn't punch. He kept his arm perfectly stationary within the villain's body, acting as a tuning fork of absolute destruction. The metal pistons inside his forearm began to vibrate at a maximum frequency of thousands of impacts per second. The effect was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic for the villain. The high-frequency kinetic vibrations transferred directly into the liquid. It was a physics phenomenon known as cavitation. The rapid changes in pressure created thousands of microscopic vacuum bubbles within the sludge. A fraction of a second later, those bubbles collapsed. The sludge villain let out a shriek of unimaginable agony. The villain's body wasn't just being displaced. It was being structurally unmade. The dark green liquid around Izuku's arm instantly frothed, turning white before violently vaporizing into a thick mist. The intense vibrations tore apart the hydrogen bonds of the sludge. What? What are you doing to me? The villain screamed, its eyes bulging as its mass rapidly began to dissolve into aerosolized mist. Let him go! Izuku roared, gritting his teeth. The recoil was absolute hell. Because Izuku wasn't striking a solid object, the kinetic feedback had nowhere to go but backward. The vibrations traveled up his biometallic arm, hitting the flesh and bone of his shoulder socket. It felt like his collarbone was being chewed by a chainsaw. The thick canvas braces holding his shoulders together began to snap, thread by thread, under the immense strain. Katsuki, trapped mere inches from Izuku's vibrating arm, felt the sludge around him lose all its grip. It felt like the thick mud was turning into a warm, fizzy foam. He fell forward, gasping for air as the sludge evaporated around his face. The vibrations were causing localized seismic tremors. The ground beneath Izuku's feet cracked and spiderwebbed. The windows of the surrounding buildings shattered simultaneously from the resonant frequency. My body! I'm falling apart! The villain wailed. The cohesion of its form was entirely shattered. Unable to maintain its structure against the localized earthquake Izuku was generating inside its stomach, the villain literally exploded into a massive spray of harmless, frothy droplets. The sudden release of pressure sent a shockwave through the alleyway, blowing out the remaining fires in a single, concussive blast of displaced air. Silence slammed back into the alleyway, broken only by the tinkling of falling glass and the hissing of Izuku's overheated exhaust vents. Izuku stood in the center of the cratered street. His right arm was glowing a dull, angry orange from the intense internal friction. Steam poured from his elbows in thick, white clouds. His shoulder braces were torn to shreds, hanging uselessly from his chest. He swayed on his feet. The agonizing pain in his right shoulder flared, a severe dislocation that sent a wave of nausea through him. He fell heavily to his knees, his heavy arms hitting the cracked asphalt with a dull clank. A few feet away, Katsuki was on his hands and knees, coughing violently and taking deep, greedy gulps of oxygen. The pro-heroes were frozen, staring at the scene in absolute disbelief. A 14-year-old kid with a mutant quirk had just fundamentally dismantled a villain that had completely neutralized 3 seasoned professionals. And he hadn't done it with a flashy explosion or a massive feat of lifting strength. He had done it with applied physics and brutal, localized destruction. In the crowd, hidden among the onlookers, a skeletal man in an oversized white t-shirt gripped the fabric over his heart. Tashinori Yagi watched the green-haired boy kneeling in the rubble. He didn't punch, Tashinori realized, his blue eyes wide with awe. He knew a kinetic strike would damage the hostage. So he used his destructive power as a localized disruptor. He turned his weapon into a surgical tool. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Tashinori felt a profound sense of shame. He, the number 1 hero, had stood on the sidelines, held back by his own physical limitations and fear of exposing his true form. But this boy, burdened with a body built for ruin, had charged into the fire without a second thought. The police and heroes quickly swarmed the alleyway. They scooped up the unconscious, frothed remains of the sludge villain into several containment drums. Then, the scolding began. Death Arms marched over to Izuku, his face red with anger. What the hell were you thinking, kid? You could have gotten yourself killed. You shattered all the windows on the block, and you nearly brought the pavement down into the sewer. Leave the hero work to the professionals, Kamui Woods nodded sternly. Your quirk is far too destructive for civilian rescue. You caused thousands of dollars in property damage. You have no finesse. Izuku kept his head down. He didn't argue. He clutched his dislocated right shoulder with his left hand, wincing in pain. They were right. He had broken the street. He had shattered the glass. He was exactly what Katsuki said he was, a walking demolition crew. Hey, the heroes paused. Izuku looked up. Katsuki was standing a few feet away. He was covered in soot, his uniform ruined, but he was glaring at the pro-heroes with a fierce, unyielding fury. Shut up, Katsuki spat, his voice hoarse. Death Arms blinked. Excuse me? I said shut up. Katsuki yelled, sparks popping weakly from his exhausted palms. He pointed a trembling finger at the heroes. You extras stood around for 10 minutes doing absolutely nothing. You were useless. This idiot. Katsuki forced himself to look at Izuku, his red eyes filled with a complex, furious mix of humiliation and grudging respect. This idiot is the only one who actually did something. If he hadn't jumped in, I'd be dead. So shut your mouths about finesse. The pro-heroes stood in stunned silence. Katsuki didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and stomped away, pushing his way through the police barricade and disappearing into the crowd. Izuku stared after him, utterly bewildered. Kaken had defended him. Kaken, who had told him he was useless just hours ago, had just defended his actions to pro-heroes, after being checked by the paramedics, who were thoroughly confused by his biometallic anatomy and had to call in a specialist just to pop his incredibly dense shoulder back into its socket. Izuku was finally allowed to leave. The sun was setting by the time he began his long, slow walk home. His body ached terribly. His right arm felt heavier than ever, the internal mechanisms groaning softly with every step. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I did it, though, Izuku whispered to himself, a small, tired smile touching his lips. I saved him. I broke the sludge. I am here. Izuku jumped, his heavy metal hands clanking together as he spun around, sliding out from a side street in a bizarre, aggressive power slide was All Might. The massive hero struck a dynamic pose, his teeth gleaming in the setting sun. All Might? Izuku gasped. What are you doing here? I thought you were surrounded by reporters. Ha ha ha. I stand for justice, not sound bites. All Might declared. He then stopped, looking around shiftily before suddenly deflating in a massive cloud of steam. Izuku watched in shock as the towering symbol of peace shrank into the skeletal, blood-spitting man he had seen in the tunnel. All Might, you're that man from earlier? Izuku asked, his analytical mind trying to process the impossibility of a dual-form physiology. I am, Toshinori sighed, wiping a speck of blood from his chin. He walked over to Izuku, his posture slouching, but his blue eyes burning with intense sincerity. Young man. I came to find you. I have corrections to make. Izuku tensed. Corrections? Am I in trouble for the property damage? No, Toshinori said firmly. I am the one in trouble. When you asked me if you could be a hero, I gave you a conditional answer. I told you that you could be a hero if you mastered your destructive power. But today, I saw the truth. Toshinori placed a bony, gentle hand on Izuku's massive, uninjured left shoulder. You didn't just rush in blindly, Toshinori said softly. I watched you. You analyzed the enemy's physiology. You recognized that blunt trauma and heat were ineffective. You realized that a high-frequency vibration would disrupt the molecular cohesion of a fluid body. You turned a quirk designed for demolition into a scalpel. Izuku's eyes widened. He had noticed. The number one hero had seen exactly what he was trying to do. The pro-heroes scolded you for your lack of finesse, Toshinori continued, his voice tight with anger at his colleagues. But they are fools. True finesse is not about looking elegant. Finesse is about applying the exact amount of power necessary to solve the problem. You sacrificed your own shoulder to ensure the hostage wasn't caught in the kinetic blowback. You were the only true hero in that alleyway today. Toshinori stepped back and bowed his head deeply. I apologize for doubting you, young man. And I am here to tell you, you don't need my permission. You already are a hero. Izuku's breath hitched. The heavy, crushing weight he had carried for 10 years, the weight of the metal, the weight of the mockery, the weight of his own doubts, seemed to fracture. The tears came, hot and fast, blurring his vision. He fell to his knees again, the metal of his arms clanking against the pavement, and he wept into his hands. He was a demolition boy. He was a clumsy brute. But All Might saw him. All Might saw the hero beneath the metal. Toshinori knelt beside the crying teenager. Tell me, young man. What is your name? Izuku looked up, sniffing loudly, his green eyes shining with a fierce, renewed determination. Izuku. Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya, Toshinori smiled warmly. You told me earlier you are aiming for UA High School. Izuku nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his wrist. Yes, sir. The hero course. It is a grueling path, Toshinori warned. The physical exam is 10 months away. Your mind is sharp, and your raw power is staggering. But your body, your joints cannot withstand the recoil of your own engines. If you shatter your bones in the exam, you will fail. Izuku looked down at his broken shoulder braces. I know. My quirk, it hurts me if I use it at maximum output. Then we have work to do, Toshinori declared, standing back up and offering a hand to the boy. I am moving to this city to teach at UA. And for the next 10 months, I am going to help you, Izuku Midoriya. I will not give you my power, you already have more than enough of your own. But I will teach you how to carry it. I will train your body to withstand the recoil, and I will teach you the martial arts necessary to wield those mighty arms. Izuku stared at the skeletal hand offered to him. This was it. The turning point. He wasn't going to be given a magical quirk to fix his problems. He was going to have to do it the hard way. He was going to have to forge his own heavy, unyielding iron into the shape of a hero. Izuku reached out his heavy, blocky metal hand and grasped All Might's palm. "I'll do it," Izuku swore, his voice rumbling with conviction. "I'll work harder than anyone else. I'll become a hero who breaks through any obstacle." Tashinori smiled, a genuine, proud smile. "I believe you will, Midoriya. Now let's get you home. Your mother is probably worried sick, and we have a training schedule to draw up. Tomorrow, we head to Dagoba Beach. We have a lot of heavy lifting to do." As they walked down the street together beneath the twilight sky, Izuku felt the weight of his arms pulling at his shoulders. They were as heavy as ever. They were still cumbersome, ugly, and destructive, but for the first time in his life, the weight didn't feel like a curse. It felt like an anchor. An anchor that would keep him grounded as he tore the world apart to save it. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam were a crucible of iron, sweat, and screaming muscles. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had been an illegal dumping ground for years, a mountain range of rusted refrigerators, abandoned cars, and rotting maritime equipment. It was a scar on the coastline. When Tashinori Yagi, All Might, had brought Izuku there, the skeletal hero hadn't asked the boy to carry the trash away. He had asked him to break it. "Your quirk is a localized seismic event," Tashinori had explained, standing atop a pile of discarded tires, the ocean breeze whipping at his oversized clothes. "Your bones and muscles have mutated to support the extra 50 kilograms of your arms, but your tendons and joints are still human enough to tear under extreme recoil. If you want to fight, you must learn to anchor yourself. You must become the bedrock." And so, Izuku became a one-man demolition crew. He didn't lift the rusted cars, he planted his feet, dropped his center of gravity, and drove his heavy, flat fists into the metal chassis, activating his pistons. He learned how to control the frequency of his internal engines. He learned that a slow, heavy pulse was better for compacting scrap metal into dense, manageable cubes, while a high-frequency, screaming vibration was necessary for turning thick concrete pylons into dust. His body adapted with terrifying efficiency. At 15 years old, Izuku Midoriya was built like a vault door. His legs, specifically his thighs and calves, had grown incredibly thick to act as biological shock absorbers. His core was a solid slab of armor, necessary to keep his spine from snapping backward when his arms fired. He was still short, still lumbering, and still hopelessly clumsy with delicate objects, but he was undeniably powerful. His mother Inko had spent her savings commissioning a new, industrial-grade suspension harness from a specialized support company. It consisted of thick, tensile steel cables and heavy-duty canvas that wrapped around his torso, crossing over his back and snapping onto reinforced anchor points near his collarbones and biceps. It helped distribute the massive weight of his gunmetal arms and absorb a fraction of the kinetic blowback when he fought. On the morning of the exam, Izuku stood before the towering, glass-fronted gates of UA High School. The sheer scale of the institution made his breath catch in his throat. This was it. The apex of Hero Academia. He took a step forward, his heavy, steel-toed boots clanking dully against the pristine brick walkway. He wore his middle school uniform, heavily modified to accommodate his physique. The sleeves were cut off at the biceps to allow his thick, metallic forearms and the hissing exhaust vents on his elbows to breathe. Over his shirt, he wore his specialized suspension harness, the straps pulled tight across his chest. "Stupid Deku. Get out of my way." The voice was a low, aggressive growl. Izuku didn't flinch. He slowly turned his head. Katsuki Bakugo strode past him, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his red eyes glaring daggers. Over the last 10 months, Katsuki's attitude had shifted. After the sludge villain incident, the overt, physical bullying had stopped entirely. Katsuki no longer treated Izuku as a fragile, pathetic stepping stone. Instead, he treated him like a natural disaster, something dangerous, ugly, and inherently offensive to Katsuki's philosophy of heroic superiority. "Morning, Kaken," Izuku rumbled, his deep voice carrying easily over the chatter of the other applicants. Katsuki stopped, side-eyeing Izuku's heavily muscled frame and the dense, industrial machinery of his arms. "Don't think you're hot shit just because you did some heavy lifting at the beach," Katsuki sneered, noticing the calluses and fresh scratch marks on Izuku's metal plating. This exam requires speed, tactics, and finesse. They're not going to just let you stand there and break rocks. When the clock starts, your heavy ass is going to be left in the dust. We'll see, Izuku replied evenly. Katsuki scoffed, a tiny spark of explosive caramel popping in his pocket, and marched toward the auditorium. Izuku took a deep breath, the vents on his elbows hissing softly, venting excess heat from his nervous internal engine. He resumed his walk, his mind racing with anxiety. He's right about my speed. If it's a foot race, I'm doomed. I need to rely on spatial awareness and interception. Lost in his muttering, Izuku's heavy boot caught the edge of an uneven paving stone. For a normal teenager, it would have been a simple stumble. For Izuku, whose upper body weighed as much as a small motorcycle, the shift in his center of gravity was catastrophic. He pitched forward, his heavy arms dragging him down faster than he could react. Oh no! If I brace my fall with my hands, I'll shatter the walkway. Suddenly, he stopped. He was hovering just an inch above the ground, his heavy metal fists suspended in midair. Whoa, hey! Are you okay? Izuku looked up. Standing next to him was a girl with a round face, rosy cheeks, and a short brown bob. She had one hand pressed firmly against his back, her face strained with immense effort. Release! She gasped, pressing her fingertips together. Gravity slammed back into Izuku. He managed to plant his boots, his massive leg muscles catching his weight with a heavy thud that vibrated through the bricks. He stood up straight, his joints groaning slightly. I am so sorry, Izuku stammered, turning to look at the girl. The girl was leaning against a lamppost, panting heavily, rubbing her temples. Holy moly! You are really heavy! I thought my quirk was gonna short out. Are you made of lead? Biometallic alloy, Izuku corrected nervously, looking down at his arms. Mutant type. I weigh over 200 pounds. I'm so sorry, I must have completely drained you. The girl waved her hands, a bright, bubbly smile breaking through her exhaustion. No, it's fine. Better than letting you faceplant before the exam even starts. I'm Ochiko Uraraka. You look super nervous, so I thought I'd help. Izuku Midoriya, he replied, giving a stiff, incredibly rigid bow. Thank you, Uraraka-san. That was a localized gravity nullification, right? Extremely versatile. The tactical applications for rescue and heavy debris removal are staggering. Uraraka blinked, surprised by the sudden, deep-voiced analytical barrage. She laughed, a clear, ringing sound. You're a pretty intense guy, Midoriya. But I like it. Let's both do our best today. She jogged off toward the entrance, waving back at him. Izuku stood there for a moment, his metallic fingers twitching. She didn't look at me like I was a monster. She just saw me. A small smile touched his face as he followed her inside. The written exam was, for Izuku, a greater nightmare than any physical trial. He sat in the massive lecture hall, a specially reinforced desk provided for him at the back. He had spent the last hour meticulously strapping a pair of thick, custom-made, silicone-padded gloves over his metal hands. His mother had made them to dampen his grip strength and provide a bit of artificial friction so he could actually hold a writing utensil without crushing it into splintered dust. The exam packet sat before him. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly. Izuku gripped the specialized, thick-barreled pencil with his padded fingers. It was incredibly awkward. He lacked human knuckles. His fingers were essentially solid metal blocks with basic hinge joints. Writing required him to move his entire forearm and shoulder in tiny, precise increments, fighting against the natural weight of his limbs. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Question 14. Calculate the trajectory of a mass moving at 40 meters per second given a wind resistance of... He knew the answer. His mind, honed by years of analytical hero observation, was razor-sharp. But putting the answer on paper was agonizing. His handwriting was massive, shaky, and required immense physical concentration to keep from tearing through the paper. Clank. Clank. Squeak. The sound of his metal joints, and the silicone rubbing against the desk echoed softly in his corner of the room. Every 10 minutes, his elbows would let out a soft hiss of steam as the stress caused his internal engines to heat up. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of the written portion, Izuku was physically exhausted. His back ached from hunching over, and his right shoulder throbbed from the microscopic, unnatural movements required to write. But he had finished. He had fought his own body and won the first round. The orientation for the practical exam was held in a massive, darkened auditorium. Pro Hero Present Mike stood on the stage, screaming into the microphone with enough force to rattle Izuku's metallic plating. Izuku sat in the middle row, furiously taking notes in his oversized notebook with his thick marker. He was in his element here, muttering under his breath. So, 3 types of villain bots. The point values are likely tied to their defensive armor plating and offensive capabilities. If the 3 pointers are heavily armored, my low-frequency compaction strikes might not pierce them efficiently. I'll need to use high-frequency cavitation strikes to bypass the armor entirely. Excuse me. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and meticulously combed blue hair stood up a few rows ahead, pointing sharply at Present Mike. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the top hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of that mistake. The boy then spun around, his finger pointing directly at Izuku. And you! In the back. With the industrial equipment. You've been muttering and hissing this entire time. Your breathing is incredibly loud and distracting. If you're treating this like a construction site instead of a sacred exam, you should leave immediately. The auditorium went dead silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to Izuku. He felt his cheeks burn bright red. I apologize, Izuku said, his deep voice carrying through the quiet room. The hissing is an involuntary biological function. It's the exhaust venting from my quirk. I can't turn it off. I'll try to keep my muttering down. Present Mike cleared his throat loudly. All right, Examinee 7111, thanks for the message. The 4th villain type is worth 0 points. It's an arena trap. If you see it, just run away. The blue-haired boy bowed stiffly. Thank you very much. And I apologize to Examinee 7112 for my assumption regarding his physiology. He sat back down. Izuku slumped in his seat, the heat radiating from his embarrassed face causing his elbows to hiss a bit louder. Even here, I stand out. I'm loud. I'm clunky. I have to prove that this body isn't just a mistake. Test Center Battle Center B was a sprawling replica of a major metropolitan district. Towering skyscrapers, winding alleyways, and wide boulevards stretched out behind massive, reinforced steel gates. Izuku stood near the back of the massive crowd of applicants. He had left his silicone gloves behind. His gunmetal hands hung heavy at his sides. He checked the straps of his suspension harness, making sure the heavy canvas was sitting perfectly flush against his collarbones. He looked around. The other applicants were stretching, looking lithe, agile, and ready. He spotted Uraraka near the front, taking deep breaths. He saw the blue-haired boy stretching his legs, revealing exhaust pipes in his calves. Speed types, Izuku noted grimly. Emitter types. They're going to swarm the city the second the gates open. I can't compete with them in a foot race. High above on a viewing tower, Present Mike's voice boomed from the loudspeakers. Right, let's start. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The massive steel gates slammed open. The crowd surged forward like a tidal wave. Applicants launched themselves into the air, sprinted at superhuman speeds, or leaped forward on mutated legs. Within 10 seconds, the entrance was completely clear, except for Izuku. He broke into a run, but it was a heavy, lumbering jog. His boots struck the pavement with ground-shaking force. Thud. 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 His massive upper body swung slightly with each step, his core muscles working in overdrive to keep him upright. By the time he passed through the gates, the nearest sounds of combat were already 3 streets away. Come on, Izuku gritted his teeth, forcing his thick legs to pump faster. Think. Don't chase them. Intercept. He turned down a narrow alleyway, hoping to bypass the main thoroughfare where the faster applicants were likely wiping out the one-pointers. As he rounded a corner into a smaller plaza, he heard the grinding of heavy gears. Rolling out from behind a full bank building were 3 robots. 2 possessed a single wheel and thin, whip-like arms, one-pointers. The third was massive, resembling a bipedal tank with thick, olive-green armor plating and heavy missile pods on its shoulders. A three-pointer. Target acquired. The three-pointer chimed in a synthesized, robotic drone. The two one-pointers rushed him, their thin arms raised to strike. Izuku didn't run. He didn't flinch. He planted his feet wide on the asphalt, dropping into a low, incredibly stable horse stance. His eyes narrowed, analyzing the incoming threat. Thin armor. Fragile joints. No need for maximum output. As the first one-pointer lunged, Izuku raised his left arm. The robot's metal whip arm struck Izuku's gunmetal forearm with a loud clang. Izuku's arm didn't even budge. The sheer mass and density of his biometallic alloy absorbed the blow perfectly. Before the robot could recoil, Izuku stepped forward, driving his right fist squarely into the center of the robot's chassis. He didn't fire the pistons. He just used his raw, physical strength. The immense, 25-kilogram weight of his arm, backed by the momentum of his heavy core, caved the robot's chest plate in completely. The one-pointer folded in half with a sickening crunch of tearing metal and went flying backward, crashing into the second one-pointer and destroying them both. 2 points, Izuku thought. But here comes the real test. The three-pointer didn't hesitate. It leveled its heavy arms and charged, its metal feet tearing up the pavement. It was easily twice Izuku's size, weighing several tons. Izuku breathed in sharply. He anchored his back foot, feeling the thick rubber sole of his boot bite into the asphalt. He tightened his core until his stomach felt like a slab of iron. He pulled his right arm back, feeling the tension in his suspension harness pull taut across his chest. It's heavily armored. A normal punch will just break my wrist. I need to shatter its molecular integrity. The three-pointer was 5 meters away. 3 meters. Izuku thrust his arm forward, aiming directly for the robot's thickest front plating. The moment his flattened, blocky knuckles made contact with the steel, his biology roared to life. CHK hiss. The exhaust vents on his elbows blew open, shooting a jet of scalding white steam backward. Inside his forearm, the heavy biometallic pistons engaged at high frequency. It wasn't a single strike. It was a terrifying, blurring vibration of kinetic impacts, striking the robot's armor hundreds of times in a fraction of a second. The sound was agonizing, a screeching, high-pitched wail of tearing metal that echoed across the entire plaza. The three-pointer's heavy armor didn't dent. It shattered. The high-frequency cavitation bypassed the structural integrity of the steel. The armor plating exploded outward in a shower of jagged shrapnel. The kinetic shockwave traveled through the robot's internal machinery, violently rattling its motherboards and drive shafts until they tore themselves apart. With a deafening boom, the three-pointer imploded, falling backward as a heap of sparking, useless scrap metal. Izuku pulled his arm back, gasping. The recoil had traveled up his arm like a bolt of lightning. His shoulder joint ached, a deep, burning pain, but the suspension harness had done its job, absorbing the worst of the skeletal shock. His right forearm was glowing a dull orange from the internal friction, the vents hissing furiously to cool the engine. 5 points, Izuku noted, rolling his heavy shoulder. The harness holds. I can do this. For the next 10 minutes, Izuku Midoriya became a localized natural disaster. He couldn't outrun the other applicants, so he didn't try. He became the undisputed king of close-quarters demolition. When a group of two-pointers cornered 3 other applicants in a dead-end street, Izuku didn't run around to help them. He simply walked up to the brick wall separating the streets, placed both his heavy hands flat against the masonry, and activated his quirk at a low, rumbling frequency. The wall dissolved into gravel, burying the robots under tons of pulverized debris and leaving the applicants staring at him in terrified awe. He was a juggernaut. He moved with a heavy, unstoppable rhythm. Step. Plant. Strike. Hiss. He ripped through the city, racking up points. 30 points. 42 points. 50 points. But it was taking a toll. With every strike, the violent recoil punished his body. The thick canvas straps of his suspension harness were beginning to fray. His collarbones felt like they were covered in deep, purple bruises. The heat radiating from his arms was making him dizzy, sweat pouring down his face and stinging his eyes. 6 minutes left. President Mick's voice echoed across the city. Izuku leaned heavily against a shattered lamppost, panting, thick clouds of steam rolling off his shoulders. 50 points. Is that enough? I haven't seen Kaken, he probably has 80 by now. I need a few more to be safe. He pushed himself off the post, ignoring the throbbing in his joints. He took a heavy step forward, and the ground vanished beneath his feet. A massive, violent earthquake ripped through the mock city. Izuku, already top-heavy, immediately lost his balance and crashed to his hands and knees, his heavy arms punching craters into the asphalt to catch himself. The sound that followed wasn't the grinding of gears. It was the apocalyptic roar of a skyscraper-sized engine. Buildings at the end of the main avenue suddenly exploded outward. Glass shattered, steel beams twisted like wet noodles, and a colossal shadow fell over the street. Rising from the dust was the zero-pointer. It was a titan. A mechanical behemoth that stood over 20 stories tall. Its single, glowing red eye swept over the fleeing applicants like a predator. One of its massive treads rolled forward, effortlessly crushing a 3-story office building into rubble. Izuku stared up at it, his green eyes wide with genuine terror. That's a joke, right? Izuku thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. President Mike said it was an arena trap. It's not meant to be fought. It's a localized natural disaster. Running away is the only logical choice. Every applicant in the street was doing exactly that. The blue-haired boy from the auditorium sprinted past Izuku, his calf engines roaring. Flee! It's a complete waste of time to engage, he yelled. Izuku forced himself to stand. His legs were shaking. He turned to run. He took one heavy step, 2 steps. Ow! Someone, help! Izuku froze. The voice was faint, barely audible over the grinding of the zero-pointer's treads, but his ears caught it. He turned his head back toward the destruction. There, about 50 meters away, right in the direct path of the colossal robot, was Uraraka. She was pinned. A massive slab of concrete from a destroyed building had trapped her leg against the pavement. She was pushing against it with her hands, her face pale with panic, desperately trying to use her quirk. But she was exhausted. The pads on her fingers were raw, and she couldn't lift the sheer mass of the debris. The zero-pointer raised its massive, house-sized fist. It was going to crush the street. It was going to crush her. Izuku's mind went entirely blank. The fear vanished. The pain in his shoulders vanished. The points, the exam, his own future, it all evaporated, leaving only a singular, burning truth. Someone is trapped under the rubble. I am the hero who clears the path. Izuku pivoted. He didn't think about his speed. He didn't think about his weight. He just commanded his body to move, but logic immediately intervened. She's 50 meters away. The fist is already coming down. I am too heavy. I am too slow. I will never reach her in time if I run. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The shadow of the massive fist darkened the street. Uraraka squeezed her eyes shut, crying out. Izuku looked down at his arms. Dr. Garaki said the recoil of my own power would shatter me. All Might said I must become the bedrock. I have a localized seismic event inside my bones. Izuku didn't run. He threw himself forward, dropping into a deep, aggressive sprinter's crouch. But instead of placing his hands lightly on the ground to push off, he reversed his grip. He slammed his heavy, flattened metal palms flat against the asphalt, pointing backward, directly behind him. He looked up, locking his eyes on the space between Uraraka and the falling fist. If I can't run, I'll fly. 80% output. Izuku roared. He opened the internal valves of his forearms wider than he ever had before. He didn't fire his pistons into an enemy. He fired them directly into the solid earth beneath him. The explosion of kinetic energy was catastrophic. The asphalt beneath his hands instantly pulverized, a massive crater blowing out behind him as the shockwave struck the bedrock. The recoil was immense. The sheer, terrifying physical blowback traveled up his rigid metal arms, violently striking his shoulders. The kinetic transfer acted like a biological cannon. Izuku's dense, 200-pound body was violently launched forward, tearing through the air at the speed of a rocket. What in the world? The blue-haired boy gasped, stopping his sprint to look back. Izuku flew across the 50-meter distance in less than a second. The wind roared in his ears. His eyes watered from the G-force. He was a human missile, a heavy, unyielding bullet of flesh and biometal. He didn't aim for Uraraka. He aimed for the sky. As he sailed over Uraraka's head, the zero-pointer's colossal fist was just meters from crushing her. Izuku twisted his dense body in midair, utilizing his incredible core strength to completely reorient himself. He faced the towering metal giant. I don't need finesse, Izuku thought, his green eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute resolve. I don't need to be gentle. He drew his right arm back. The exhaust vents on his elbow were glowing a bright, blinding cherry red. Steam hissed violently, boiling the moisture in the air. 100%. Izuku reached the apex of his launch, directly in front of the zero-pointer's massive, glowing red optical sensor. Maximum. Overdrive. Izuku thrust his right arm forward, burying his massive, blocky metal fist directly into the center of the robot's face. He didn't just hit it. He unleashed the absolute maximum frequency his internal engine was capable of producing. CRRRASCKKKKKK. The sound was not of impact, but of fundamental structural failure. The hyperkinetic cavitation ripped through the zero-pointer's head. The vibrations were so intense they warped the air around Izuku's arm, creating a visible shockwave that blew the clouds above away in a perfect ring. The robot's thick armor didn't shatter into pieces, it liquefied. The steel groaned, shrieked, and instantly lost all molecular cohesion. The vibration traveled down the robot's neck, violently tearing apart its central drive core. The Titan froze. Its red eye flickered and died. And then, the zero-pointer's head completely exploded. Tons of pulverized steel, melted wiring, and frothed oil erupted outward like a volcano. The shockwave rolled across the entire mock city, shattering remaining glass and knocking applicants off their feet blocks away. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Izuku had struck an immovable object with an unstoppable force while suspended in midair, with absolutely no bedrock to anchor his recoil. The kinetic blowback traveled down his right arm with the force of a train crash. Snap! The heavy-duty, industrial steel cables of his suspension harness violently sheared in half, whipping across his chest. The thick canvas tore like wet tissue paper. With nothing left to absorb the shock, the recoil hit his skeleton. Izuku screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of absolute agony. His right shoulder joint subluxated instantly, the humerus tearing fiercely through the cartilage and muscle, dislocating backward with a sickening pop. His collarbone fractured under the sheer stress. The colossal robot began to tilt backward, its internal systems completely annihilated by the vibration, falling away from the trapped Uraraka. Izuku was left hanging in the air, his right arm dangling uselessly behind him, completely dead weight. His internal engine sputtered, the vents spitting dark, oily smoke as the system overheated and forcibly shut down. Gravity reclaimed him. Izuku began to plummet toward the debris-covered street, 50 feet below. I did it, Izuku thought, his vision swimming with black spots from the excruciating pain. I broke the obstacle. I saved her. He looked at the ground rushing up to meet him. But my harness is broken. I can't brace myself. If I land on my arms, I'll shatter my spine. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end. He had proven his point. A demolition boy could be a hero. Suddenly, a sharp, stinging pain slapped across his cheek. Release! Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was hovering just inches above a jagged piece of rebar. Uraraka was lying on top of the concrete slab that had trapped her, having dragged herself halfway up. She was panting heavily, her hand outstretched, her fingertips glowing faintly. Izuku hung suspended in the air. Uraraka's face turned green. She violently vomited to the side, completely overwhelming her inner ear by trying to lift his immense mass after exhausting herself. The gravity nullification broke. Izuku dropped the remaining few inches, his heavy back hitting the pavement with a dull thud. His heavy, useless right arm clanked against the rubble. He lay there, staring up at the clear blue sky through the smoke of the destroyed robot. The pain in his shoulder was blinding, pulsing in time with his racing heartbeat. Tea time's up. Present Mick's voice echoed across the devastated city, though it sounded shaky and awestruck. The exam was over. Izuku didn't move. He couldn't. His body had completely shut down. He heard the sound of footsteps rushing toward him. Is he alive? Did you see that? He one-shot the 0-pointer. His arm looks completely messed up. The blue-haired boy from the auditorium stood over him, his eyes wide behind his glasses. He looked from Izuku to the smoldering, headless ruin of the 0-pointer, and then to Uraraka. He saw the trap, the boy muttered to himself, his voice full of stunned realization. He knew it was worth 0 points. But he sacrificed everything to save her. He had the true makings of a hero all along, and I scolded him for breathing loudly. Step aside, step aside. Make way for the elderly. A small, elderly woman in a nurse's outfit, wielding a massive syringe like a walking cane, pushed her way through the crowd of awestruck teenagers. Recovery girl. She took one look at Izuku, lying in the rubble, his heavy metal arms smoking and his shoulder hideously dislocated. Good grief, she sighed, shaking her head. A heavy-density mutant type. The recoil must have been catastrophic without a proper anchor. She leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on Izuku's forehead. Izuku felt a sudden, massive surge of exhaustion wash over him as his body's cellular regeneration went into hyperdrive. The torn muscles in his shoulder rapidly began to knit themselves back together. With a sickening crunch that made the other applicants wince, his heavy biometallic arm snapped back into its socket. Izuku gasped, his eyes rolling back. The pain faded into a dull, exhausted ache. Rest now, boy, recovery girl said softly, tapping his metal forearm with her cane. You've broken enough things for one day. Izuku closed his eyes. The last thing he heard before slipping into unconsciousness was the sound of the blue-haired boy, demanding the other applicants help clear the rubble off Uraraka's leg. Izuku smiled in his sleep. His arms were heavy. They were terrifying. But they had done exactly what they were meant to do. They had cleared the path.